This is AQS Inmate Call, the show where real stories from inside Washington's correctional system come into the light. The messy ones, the hopeful ones, and the ones that remind us that people are always more than the worst thing they've ever done. And I'm your host, Joel Wilborn. Today's story involves horses. Yeah, horses. Inside a prison. And if that sounds unexpected, that's because it is. And that's exactly why it works. At the Washington Correction Center for Women, there's a program that doesn't look like anything you picture when you think rehabilitation. No desks, no worksheets, no lectures. Instead, you step into a paddock. You're face to face with a 1,000-pound animal who doesn't care what you're charged with, what you're ashamed of, or what you're trying to hide. Horses don't do judgment, they do honesty. And for many of the women in this program, that's the first thing, time, or that's the first time in a long time they've been met with that kind of presence, calm, steady, and impossible to fool. The program's goal is simple: rebuild confidence, teach emotional regulation, and help women practice communication and trust in a space where mistakes don't get punished, they get learned from. Here's the thing about horses: they're prey animals. They read body language like their lives depend on it, because they do. If you're anxious, they feel it. If you're angry, they feel it. And if you're trying to fake calm, they definitely feel it. So the women in this program aren't just brushing a horse or leading it around a ring. They're learning how to regulate their own emotions in real time. They're learning how to communicate without force. They're learning how to build trust slowly, consistently, and with patience. And for people who spent years in a system built on control, punishment, and hypervigilance, that's a radical shift. One of the things that struck me most is how many participants described the horses as mirrors, and not of who they were, but of who they're trying to become. A woman who's been shut down for years suddenly finds her voice because a horse won't move until she speaks with confidence. Another learns to manage her frustration because snapping at a horse doesn't get results. Gentleness does. Someone who's been told she's too much her whole life discovers that a horse responds best when she stands tall and owns her space. These are life skills, not theoretical ones, lived ones. And they matter when you're trying to re enter a world that expects you to be stable, employable, emotionally balanced, and ready to succeed, even though the system rarely gives you the tools to get there. Programs like this one fill that gap. They don't fix everything, but they give people a chance to practice being the version of themselves they want to carry forward. Look, Washington's correctional systems has its problems, and I've broadcast a few of them. You've heard me talk about them on this show. Understaffing, overcrowding, inconsistent programming, a culture that often prioritizes control over rehabilitation. But every once in a while, something breaks through the noise, something that reminds us what corrections could look like if we centered humanity instead of punishment. This horse assisted therapy program is one of those things. It's small, it's quiet, it's not flashy, but it's real. And the women who go through it walk away with something the system rarely gives them: a sense of compatibility, a sense of calm, a sense that they can lead not just a horse, but their own life. If you ever stood next to a horse, you know the feeling, that mix of awe and vulnerability. Now imagine experiencing that inside a prison yard where vulnerability is usually a liability. That's the power of this program. It creates a space where healing isn't just allowed, it's practice. And maybe that's the lesson here. Sometimes the most effective rehabilitation doesn't come from a policy memo or a mandatory class. Sometimes it comes from a creature who asks nothing of you except honesty. This has been AQS Inmate Call. Stay safe, stay curious, and keep those voices heard.